Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing an experiment using punch needle fabrics. So basically where this idea came from is that in a lot of stores, right, like Joann's, places like that, they sell the punch needle kits where usually you get a punch needle, you get the fabric, and you get the yarn all together. But of course, I like to make my own things and come up with my own kits and make my own designs. So I wanted to find the right fabric to basically be able to recreate a punch needle kit using my own design. But the tricky thing is that I am having the hardest time matching different punch needles to the fabrics to the yarns. And there are a lot of different blogs out there. I'll link some of the ones I read down below about basically what kind of fabric you should use, what kind of fabric you shouldn't use, but they all seem to be very specific to a certain weight of yarn or a certain type of project. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take different punch needle sizes, different fabrics, and different weights of yarn and try them all out and just give you some feedback in case you are curious about this as well. So what I have to work with is first I just have one of the wooden punch needles, and this one's essentially the biggest size. So this is the one sometimes called like the Oxford punch needle. This is what typically comes in the kits when they have worsted weight yarn. Or I'll put if you use yarn numbers instead of the terminology for the different weights, I'll put those on the screen as well. Then I have one of the boy adjustable punch needles. So these ones basically come with 4 different sizes, and all 4 of these sizes are larger than the wooden handle punch needle. Then for the different fabrics I'm going to be testing out. So first I have some burlap. That's my first experiment I'm going to try. Next up I have some toweling fabric. Next, this one in the store was specifically marketed towards being a punch needle fabric or a needle punch cloth. So I'm going to give that one a try. Next up I have the Aida fabric. And this one a lot of blogs said not to use, but I was just curious why they were all saying not to use it. So I got one to test it out. And then lastly, I also have some linen. And if you're curious about whether or not you can punch needle into knit fabric, like that you hand knit, I'm gonna make a separate video for that one where I test out different hand knit fabrics and see what works and what doesn't work. So keep an eye out for that video separately. And now the weights of yarn I'm gonna be using, I'm just gonna start out at the worsted weight and then go all the way down to fingering weight, and then also try out some of the tapestry floss as well, just so that you can see the full range of different yarn weights, different fabrics, and see what works and what doesn't work. So let's get started. So what I've done here is I've just cut little squares of each one of the different fabrics to try out. And I'm just gonna start with the largest spacing for each one of the punch needles. So I'm gonna start with the burlap and then go down each size. So it's gonna be burlap, then the punch needle cloth, then the Aida, the toweling fabric, and the linen. And I'm basically just gonna see how small of a weave I can keep going down until I start breaking the actual fabric with each size punch needle. So starting out here, I have some worsted weight yarn, and this one's just in the wooden punch needle. This is the largest size punch needle, so this one's really pretty big. And I'm going to give it a go. Okay, so I didn't feel anything breaking on this burlap or jute fabric. And on the other side, you can see it fills in really pretty nicely. So now I'm just gonna pull out the thread and see if I broke anywhere. And I did not. It looks really pretty nice. So I would say this burlap fabric with the worsted weight yarn and the wooden punch needle works pretty well. The only thing you'd have to keep in mind with this fabric is like it's a little rougher or like a more rustic fabric. So you just have to keep that in mind for whatever fabric you're working on. So this one I can barely get the punch needle to go through, and I feel like I'm gonna break it. Yep, so I'm gonna stop pushing there. This one is not working out. So this one is the punch needle fabric. Does not work with the largest size punch needle here. And for this largest size, I'll just try the Aida fabric, and then I'll probably skip the next two just because these are the tightest weaves. So because they don't go in this one, they kind of automatically won't go in the next one. So this Aida fabric has like a very, very stiff texture. So that's definitely something you'd want to keep in mind. If you're using this for something, like it has, like it's kind of the fabric you'd just use for cross stitch instead of this, like it doesn't, it's very stiff. Nope, I keep hearing the fabric break, so I'm gonna stop there. And you can see in there, there's a couple broken pieces. So this one's not working out well, mainly because these the fabric sections or the weave doesn't move around the punch needle. It's very stiff, so they just kind of stay in the same placement and just break instead. Okay, so for the worsted weight yarn or the medium weight yarn on the wooden punch needle, I would say you want to look for something that's about the same weave as burlap. The nice thing about burlap too is it's a really good price point, and it does come in a lot of different colors. So I'd say that's a pro there. But any of these other fabrics were too tight of a weave to be able to use this punch needle on. So something to keep in mind. So up next, I have the next size punch needle, next smallest size. This one is the 3mm one. So this is the largest size adjustable top that comes in the adjustable set. So it's 3mm is the top part. And then inside of it, I have some sport weight yarn. And again, I'm gonna start with the kind of like loosest fabric. So I'm gonna start with the burlap. Okay, so that's how that one turned out. I actually think it looks really nice. I just ended up going into every single one of the little holes in the burlap just to make sure I filled it in really nicely. But I would say this weight yarn with this 3mm punch works out really well on the burlap. And then of course I just go in and fill in the inside there. But I think that looks really nice. When I pull it out, there's no breaks in the burlap either. So next up I have the punch needle fabric. Okay, so that's what it looks like in the punch needle fabric. And I did feel like I heard it break a couple times. Let's pull the yarn out and check. You can see there are a couple breaks in the fabric all around there. So this size punch needle probably would be a little too large for the 3mm punch. Now I'm gonna try the Aida fabric. And I feel like I can already hear the Aida fabric breaking. Let's take it out and take a look. So yeah, you can see the little tiny fibers breaking off around where I was punch needling. So again, no for the Aida. And for this one, I will try the toweling fabric as well, just to check. So I felt like part of the time it was going really smoothly, but I do think I heard a break maybe about once. So overall, it actually looks pretty good in the toweling fabric. There are a couple breaks, so you just have to really take your time if you're using something like this, because I feel like that's what made it break more was when I was trying to go faster. But like all the way down that line, it looks really pretty good. So with the 3mm punch, the ones that work the best are first the burlap, again, a winner. And then I wouldn't recommend the punch needle cloth. That one was a little too tightly woven. No for the Aida. Too stiff of a fabric that just keeps breaking. And then the toweling fabric, I'd say a maybe on that one. So that one you would just have to make sure that you went really slowly to try and not break the fabric itself. So now next up, I have a 2.2mm punch, fingering weight yarn, and I'm gonna go through the full range of fabric. So on this one, you can see that it wasn't actually catching the thread a lot of the time. So that basically just tells me that this one's a little too loose of a weave. So burlap is a no for the fingering weight thread, or yarn, sorry. Next up we have the needle punch fabric. So there it is. I think that looks really pretty good. Now let me pull it out. I did hear it break one time, but I think that was more me than the actual fabric. But yeah, I think that looks really nice, especially if you compare it to the last weight of yarn in punch needle size. So I would say this punch needle cloth works really well with a 2.2 millimeter punch needle and some fingering weight yarn. Okay. So you can see there were a couple times there where it wasn't quite catching. And that's the other side. So I actually don't think this Aida fabric looks quite as good as the punch needle fabric that I just did. I only heard it break a couple times. So yeah, that looks pretty good. So I would say you could get away with using this size 11 Aida with the 2.2 millimeter punch and fingering weight yarn. So there it is on the toweling fabric. So it looks like there might have been about one place over here it didn't quite catch. But it looks pretty good. I actually really like punching into this toweling fabric too because it's just so soft and flexible. And I don't see any breaks there. So this one's actually linen from placemats I just made. So this probably wouldn't be the exact linen you would use, but I just figured I'd give it a try here. So there it is on the linen. That actually worked really pretty well. Again, same with the toweling fabric. This fabric's just so nice and flexible. And then there might be like one or so breaks in there, but I really don't notice anything too bad. So I would say you could use, again, if you're being careful, you could use this linen fabric with the 2.2 millimeter punch. So again, for this one, I would say no to the burlap, yes to the needle punch cloth, maybe to this Aida. I just don't like the stiffness of the fabric. It just tends to break no matter what size I'm using. Yes to the toweling, and also yes to this linen. I thought this size and the combinations was really pretty flexible. Next up, I have 3 strands of embroidery floss, and then this is the 1.6 millimeter punch needle. And here I'm just gonna skip the burlap because given that the last size slipped through the burlap, just gonna skip it. So I'm gonna start with the needle punch cloth. Okay, so there are the little punches. And this fabric felt like it worked really well. I didn't really hear any breaking at all. Yep, that looks really nice. So I would say the punch needle cloth, or the needle punch cloth, this one works really well with the 3 strands of embroidery floss. So this one, I would actually say the spacing is too wide. It kind of constrains you. So the Aida fabric did not work out well for this embroidery floss. No breaks though. So there it is on the toweling fabric. And the toweling fabric would give me more flexibility to go fill in any of those gaps. I didn't hear any breaking at all. Looks really nice. So there's the linen. Worked pretty similarly to the toweling fabric. Now here it is a little bit of a tighter weave. So again, I just had to be careful that I wasn't going too quickly and breaking any of the fabric. Looks pretty good. I see maybe 1 or 2 breaks over here on this side, but overall, really pretty nice. So overall, when it comes to the 3 strands of embroidery floss, I would say no to burlap, yes to this needle punch cloth, no to the Aida, yes to the toweling fabric and like a maybe to the linen again. I think my favorite one to use were probably one of the two of these, the needle punch cloth or this toweling fabric. And now for this last size, I have one piece of the embroidery floss, or just one strand of it. And this is the 1.26 millimeter punch needle. And for this one, I'm gonna skip the burlap because that's gonna fall out. And I'm also gonna skip this Aida fabric because that didn't work for the 3 strands of embroidery floss. So I'm gonna skip that one as well. And I'm gonna be starting with this needle punch cloth. So here's that one. There were a couple places where it didn't quite catch, so this weave might actually be too large for just a single strand of embroidery floss. Didn't break anywhere. You can actually barely see where I did it. It's kind of funny because you can see the different sizes. This was the worsted weight, went down one size, down the next size. 3 strands of embroidery floss, 1 strand of embroidery floss. So it's kind of cool seeing them all together. So I would say no to this one for 1 strand. Okay, so there is the 1 strand on the toweling fabric. This one I had some trouble with again, just like the punch needle cloth, because I found it wasn't quite catching, so then I made it punch further down, but then I think it just kind of looks messy. So I'm gonna say no to this one as well. Okay, so there it is on the linen. And this linen I would say is getting the closest to having it work well, just because the weave is so tight that it kind of can hold it in there. And I was able to get smaller little loops too, which I prefer the look of that with this single strand of embroidery floss. On the back, you can see there are a couple places where it didn't quite catch quite enough. But overall, I would say with this single strand, this is really the closest you're gonna get here with this linen. Everything else I think was a little too loose for it. I hope you found this video really helpful. Down below in the description box, I put a little write-up of which fabric I would use or what kind of weave to look for I would use depending on your yarn size and punch needle size. Just to go over it real quick, if you're using something like a worsted weight or a DK weight yarn, I would recommend the wooden punch needle and then something with a really loose weave like this burlap. I found that worked really quite well. Then as you go down in sizes, so let's say you're using like a fingering weight yarn and a smaller size punch needle, I would recommend using this needle punch cloth. I found this worked really well. The only downside is that this stuff can be kind of pricey. So a lower cost alternative could be something like this toweling fabric. And this stuff you can get at most crafting stores. This just worked really well. There are a couple instances though where you do want to go a little bit slower so you don't end up breaking it. Then if you're doing something that's like really fine work with the embroidery floss, I would say stick with like the toweling fabric or the linen. Those two I think would be the best bet. I hope you guys found this video helpful, just going through the different fabrics and punch needle sizes. I know it was definitely a good experiment for me to go through, just so that I learned more about each one of the fabrics. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them down below. And if you have any advice for different punch needle sizes to use or don't use, or good places to find the fabric, please leave those down below as well so we can all help each other out. And I'll just see you in my next video. Bye.